Chapter Precursors of a New Civilization.
The shoots of the beautiful new future are in the Russian summer people.
These words sounded of their own accord inside me. At that moment, Anastasia was not nearby. I instantly remembered the excitement and delight with which she spoke about Russian summer people 4 years before. She believes that it is thanks to the summer people that a planetary disaster did not occur on Earth in 1992. As it happened, it was in Russia that this amazing movement began, caressing a part of the Earth. I remembered her talking about this.
Millions of human hands touched the Earth in love, their hands, not their various mechanisms. Russians touched the Earth tenderly on their small dacha plots, and it sensed this. The Earth sensed the touch of each hand individually. The Earth may be big, but it is very, very sensitive, and it found the strength to hold on.
4 years ago, I did not take this statement seriously, but now, after becoming familiar with many attempts by people from various countries to create spiritually ecological settlements, I suddenly understood. In Russia, without high-profile proclamations, appeals, publicity, and pomposity, the largest-scale project was embedded in reality, a project having significance for all humanity. In the context of the many Russian dacha societies, information from different countries in the world about their creation of eco-settlements became simply silly. Judge for yourself. In front of me lies a pile of articles and various collections where the problem is earnestly discussed of how many people should live in an eco-settlement. They advise no more than 150, and they lend great significance to religious guidance for eco-settlement government structures. But Russia's dacha cooperatives have existed for years and count 300 families and more apiece. Each is administered by 1 or 2 people, often retirees. Can the chair of a Russian dacha cooperative be called a manager? He's more like a registering body or an administrator carrying out the majority's will. Russia's dacha movement has no centralized administrative bodies in general. But meanwhile, the State Statistics Committee data for 1997 proclaimed that 14.7 million families have orchards and 7.6 million have vegetable gardens. They cover 1,821,000 hectares. The population is independently cultivating 90% of the potatoes, 77% of the fruits and berries, and 73% of the vegetables. Theoreticians who have been studying plans for eco-settlements and eco-villages for years will probably object that a dacha cooperative is not an eco-settlement, to which I respond immediately that this is a matter of essence, not names. The overwhelming majority of Russia's dacha cooperatives operate by eco-settlement principles. Not only that, but without making high-flown statements about spiritual perfection or the need for a protective attitude toward nature, summer people have, by their way of life, indeed rather than in words, shown their own spiritual growth. They have planted millions of trees. Thanks to their efforts, orchards now bloom on hundreds of thousands of hectares, formerly considered wasteland, not arable so-called worthless land. We hear that some Russians are practically starving. First teachers, then miners are striking, and politicians busily search for ways to solve the country's crisis. More than once during perestroika, Russia was a hair's breadth away from a wide-scale social explosion. But it didn't happen. Now let us try removing from recent years 90% of the potatoes, 77% of the berries and fruits, and 73% of the vegetables. Instead of these percentages, let us add the level of nervousness of millions of people. This will have to be done if we exclude from recent years the consoling factor of dachas. You don't even have to be a psychologist to see whom summer people calm down when they come in contact with their gardens. So what would we have had in 1992, 1994, or 1997? And any of those years there could have been a tremendous social explosion. What might it bring to a planet crammed with deadly weapons? But the catastrophe didn't happen. Anastasia says that there was no planetary-scale catastrophe in 1992, thanks only to Russia's summer people. And now, after familiarizing myself with the information, clarifying the situation, I believe her. Right now, it isn't that important which smart mind in our country's leadership came up with the decision to give the green light to the dacha movement in Russia, at that time still the Soviet Union. Perhaps it suited Providence to embed such a thing in Russia specifically. Right now, something else is important. The movement exists. It is the most vivid proof of the possibility of achieving stability in the human community, possibly the stability toward which many peoples on the different continents have striven for millennia and been unable to reach. Anastasia says that the dacha movement in Russia represents the greatest turning point in the development of the human community.
Summer people are the precursors of what is beautiful.
By which she means the plan she has drawn for future settlements. I myself would like to live in one of those beautiful settlements and for it to be in a prosperous country called Russia.
Chapter: A Search for Proof.
Russia of the future. This is a beautiful country where many from our present generation will have a chance to live a happy life. Russia of the future is a country that will turn the planet's human community toward happiness. I saw a beautiful, flourishing Russia. It was she, Anastasia, who showed me our country's future, and it became absolutely unimportant and insignificant how this ardent, resilient hermit living in the middle of the Siberian taiga was able to travel to other planets, into the future or the past, how she connected with invisible threads the souls of people living in different countries into a united, exciting impulse to create. What is important is something completely different, the fact that this impulse exists. Does it really matter where she gets so much information of every kind and knowledge about our life? Incomparably more important is the result of this knowledge, the fact that people in different cities who have come in contact with her information are planting cedar alleys, that they have started to produce cedar oil, and more songs and poems are appearing about the beautiful. Fantastic. She dreams of something. I write it down, and before you know it, it's come true. Some fantasy. But after all, this fantasy is coming true in real life for all to see. She has dreamed of a beautiful country. Could that really come true, too? It has to. I have to help her somehow. Calculating and analyzing what Anastasia told and showed me, I became increasingly convinced of the reality of a beautiful future. I believed in it. I began to believe everything Anastasia said. But I just could not finish writing and publishing the chapter about Russia's future. It didn't belong in the previous book, Co-Creation. The issuing of this book was held up because of it. I wanted everything said to be sufficiently convincing and real, so that not only I myself, but many others as well, would believe and begin to act, to create a beautiful future. But I simply could not be completely convinced due to a few things Anastasia said. In Co-Creation, I reported Anastasia's assertion that all the nature that surrounds us is nothing but God's materialized thoughts. If man could understand them, just in part, he would not need to spend a lot of effort obtaining food and fertilizing the land, since it in itself could restore its own fertility, nor would he have to waste effort on fighting different pests and weeds. His thoughts would be released from everyday problems, and he could take up a matter more central to his existence, the joint creation with God of beautiful worlds. I wanted lots of people to believe what she said, but how could people trust her if all of agrotechnology, and not only in our country, cannot get along without fertilizers? Many plants in different countries of the world are busy producing various chemicals to add to the soil. I brought up this question a few times with agricultural scientists, but I always got more or less the same condescending answer.
One could, of course, set up a paradisical garden on 1 hectare of land, but you would have to work in this garden from morning to night. Without adding fertilizers to the soil, there won't be a good harvest. You can't get along without the use of pesticides either, because many pests will destroy a crop.
To the argument Anastasia cited about how everything grows in the taiga without man's assistance, the scientists said,
Let's say it does, but if we are to believe your hermit, then the taiga's program was set directly by God. Man needs more than what grows in the taiga. For example, the taiga has no orchard, because an orchard requires man's care. It cannot grow itself.
I visited several gardening stores a few times. I stood in the stores and observed many buying various bags of chemicals. I looked at these people and thought they would never believe what Anastasia said, and that meant it made no sense to write about Russia's future. They wouldn't believe in it. They wouldn't believe because this future is linked above all with a new consciousness, a different attitude toward the land and environment. But there is not a single modern man who could confirm what she said, not a single real-life example confirming her words. In reality, it's just the opposite. Everything contradicts her. Plants produce an array of pesticides. Networks of stores sell fertilizers and chemicals. Many engage in scientific research on the earth. The absence of weighty proofs for Anastasia's assertions had such a powerful effect on me that I couldn't write anything at all. So I agreed to go to Innsbruck, Austria. I had a call from a publisher in Germany who said that Leonard Hoscheneng, director of the Bioenergetics Institute, had invited me to talk about Anastasia before Europe's leading healers. The institute paid for my travel and stay and was prepared to pay 1,000 marks for each hour I spoke. I didn't go there for the money, but rather to search for convincing arguments, understandable to many people for and against Anastasia's project and her assertions about Russia's future. Dr. Hoscheneng, who had invited me to speak to the healers himself, was a professional physician and well-known hereditary healer. His grandfather had treated the family of the Japanese emperor and many others of high rank. He personally owned, apart from the Institute building, several comfortable hotels where many patients stayed who had come from European countries, as well as a restaurant, a park, and a few other buildings downtown. He was a millionaire, but despite the impressions many Russians have about the way of life of a Western rich man, Leonard, as I learned, did all the important treatment work himself. He saw personally each person who came to see him, as many as 50 a day, and he often worked 16 hours at a stretch. Only sometimes did he entrust an appointment to a healer from Russia. I spoke to the healers who had gathered in Innsbruck, realizing that Anastasia interested them above all. I devoted the large part of my speech to telling them about her, and at the end spoke a little about her project, secretly hoping to hear from those gathered confirmation or refutation of her plan for a future Russia. But they neither confirmed nor refuted anything. They just kept asking clarifying questions. That evening, Hoscheneng gave a banquet in a restaurant. I would call it simply a dinner. Each person could order whatever he wanted, but everyone was modest, preferring salads, and no one drank alcohol or smoked. I did not order a drink either, not because I was afraid of looking like a white crow among them. I simply did not feel like having meat or alcohol for some reason. At this dinner we talked about Anastasia again. That was where the phrase was born. I don't remember who uttered it first. Russia's beautiful future is linked to the Siberian Anastasia. The words were picked up, and they were repeated in various interpretations by the healers from Italy, Germany, and France. I waited for specifics. Why, at what expense would the beautiful come to be? But no one offered specific proofs. The healers based themselves on their intuition, but I needed proof. Could the earth feed man without special expenditures on its part, merely at the expense of man correctly understanding the thought of a God no one could see? Returning to Russia, I recalled the words of the European healers once again without any particular hope, and attempted to find specific proofs for which I was prepared to go anywhere. But I did not have to go far. An incredible coincidence, so incredible it seemed as if someone had set it up on purpose, presented not simply theoretical proofs, but was a living, real confirmation of Anastasia's words. What happened was the following.
Chapter: An Eternal Garden.
I went to the country with associates of the Anastasia Foundation for Culture and Creative Support of the city of Vladimir. We spread out on the picturesque shore of a small pond. The women put out salads for dinner and the men took care of a fire. I was standing on the shore looking at the water and thinking my own thoughts. My mood was less than great.
Vladimir Nikolaevich, about 7 kilometers from here, among the meadows, there are 2 former noblemen's estates. There's no trace of the buildings there. All that's left are the orchards. No one looks after them, but they bear fruit every year. They yield more fruit than the village trees that people tend and fertilize. In 1976, there was a deep freeze in these parts, and people's orchards perished, so they had to plant new ones, but the freeze didn't touch these 2 orchards in the middle of the field. In fact, not a single one of those trees died.
Why didn't the freeze touch them? Are they a special frost-resistant kind?
They're ordinary kind. But on these former noblemen's estates, everything was set up in a certain way, everything was planted in a certain way on a single hectare. You have to understand, everything there is set up very similarly to what Anastasia says in your books. About 200 years ago, people planted Siberian cedars and our oaks around these orchards. Not only that, but the hay from the grass that grows there is lusher, and it doesn't spoil for much longer. If you want to take a look, we can go there right now. The road runs through the field, but the SUV will get through.
I couldn't believe my ears. Who? How? This kind of gift being offered up at the right time and the right place? Are the chance incidents that happen to us truly chance? Let's go. The track ran through the fields of a former state farm. I say fields, but they looked more like meadows luxuriant in grass. Evgeny, Veronica's husband, commented,
The sowed area is less now because the agro company doesn't have any money for fertilizer. On the other hand, the land is resting. And not only the land. This year the birds began to sing. They've never chirped so cheerfully before. What are they so happy about? Maybe that the grass in the fields is free of chemicals now. Before the revolution, there were villages in these meadows. My granny used to talk about them. Now no trace of any village remains. There it is. Look, there, to the right of the track, the former nobleman's estate.
Off in the distance, on an area of about 1 hectare, tall trees grew thickly. This place amid the fields and meadows seemed like simply a green island of forests, shaped at random. When we drove up closer, I saw amid the dense 200-year-old oaks and shrubbery the entrance into a forest oasis. We walked through this entrance and inside, you see, old apple trees with calloused trunks spread their branches into their space, their branches sprinkled unusually thickly with fruit. Not dug around, growing amid the grass, not sprayed against pests. The old apple trees were bearing fruit, and their fruits were not wormy. Some of the trees were quite old, and their branches were breaking under the fruit's weight. Quite old, this was probably their last year for bearing. Soon they would die off. But next to each very old apple tree, shoots of a new tree were already poking through the ground. These trees must be about to die. But they won't until they see fresh and established shoots from their own seed. I walked through the orchard, tasted its fruits, and wandered among the oaks growing around it, and it was as if I could see the thoughts of the person who created this beautiful oasis come to life. It was as if I could hear him thinking, here, around the orchard, I need to plant an oak grove. It will protect the orchard from the cold and the heat in a drought year. The birds will build their nest in the high trees and won't let worms make themselves at home. Here I'll plant a shady alley of oaks on the shores of a pond. The oaks' crowns will join when they grow up. Below, the wide alley will be shady as well. Suddenly, another vague thought seemed to make my blood pulse faster through my veins. What did it want from me, this thought? And like a flash, of course, Anastasia. She's right, of course, when she says,
You can feel God by coming in contact with and continuing His creations.
not through grimacing, leaping, and new fashion rituals, but by turning to Him and His thoughts directly, you probably can understand His desires and your own purpose. Here I am now, standing on the shore of a man-made pond, under oak trees, and it is as if I were reading the thoughts of the person who had created this vital creation. And he, this person, this Russian who lived here 200 years ago, probably more than others felt the thoughts of the Creator and so was able to fashion a heavenly creation, his own orchard, his own family nest. He died, this Russian, but his nest remains and is bearing its own fruits, and feeding the children from the neighboring villages, who come here in fall to treat themselves to its fruits, which someone else gathers and sells. And you Russian, probably wanted your grandchildren and great-grandchildren to live here. Of course you did, because you created something eternal, not some perishable cottage. Yet where are they now, your grandchildren and great-grandchildren? Your homestead is abandoned, the grass is overgrown, and the pond is drying up, but for some reason the alley has not grown up in tall weeds, there is only grass on it, like a carpet. The heavenly corner you created, your homestead, must still be waiting for your grandchildren. Decades pass and centuries, but it waits. So where are they? Who are they now? Whom do they serve? What do they worship? Who drove them out of here? Might we not blame our revolution for everything? Of course we can. People only revolt when there is a cardinal change for the majority in their consciousness. So what happened in the minds of our contemporaries Russian for your homestead to be abandoned? Local old-timers tell stories about how the old Russian gentleman averted a bloody slaughter at his estate. When a revolutionary mob, heated up with home brew, assembled from the 2 neighboring villages and went to loot his homestead, the old gentleman came out to greet them with a basket of apples, and died from a shot from a double-barrel gun. The night before he had known they were assembling to loot his home, but he talked his grandson, a Russian officer, into leaving the estate. The grandson, who had fought at the front and had been decorated with the Order of St. George, left with his fellow officers, who had trilinear rifles over their shoulders and a battle-tested machine gun on a carriage. He probably became an émigré and now had his own grandchildren growing up. Your grandchildren are growing up in another country, Russian, while in Russia, on your homestead, the leaves of your orchard trees are rustling in the breeze, and each year the old apple trees are bearing fruit, astounding the neighboring inhabitants with their abundant harvest. Not even a trace remains of your house and outbuildings. They were all carted off, but your orchard lives in spite of everything, probably in the hopes that your grandchildren will return and try the best apples in the world. But your grandchildren never seem to come. Why is this happening, and who forces us to search for our own well-being to the detriment of others? Who forces us to breathe air saturated with toxic gases and dust rather than flower pollen and beneficial ethers? Who forces us to drink water poisoned by gases? Who are we now? Who? Why aren't your grandchildren returning to your family nest, Russian? The apples at the second estate were even more delicious than at the first. Handsome Siberian cedars have been planted around this orchard.
There used to be more cedars. Now there are only 23 left.
The local inhabitants told me.
After the revolution, when there were still official work days, they gave people cedar nuts for their work. Now everyone who wants to gathers them. However, sometimes they strike the cedars very hard with heavy beams to make the cones fall.
Planted 200 years ago, the 23 Siberian cedars stood in a row, like soldiers, shielding the beautiful orchard against frosty winds and pests. There had been more, but one by one they died, because in Siberia, tall pines always grow around a cedar grove. A single cedar cannot withstand gusts of wind, and its root system is not large. The cedar feeds through its crown as well as its roots, and so the pines protect them. Here the cedars were lined up. For the last 150 years they held on, and then, when their crowns pushed out, they began to fall, one after another. In 50 years, no one had thought to plant a pine or birch nearby. So the Siberian cedars countered the evil winds in just their one row, protecting the orchard. One of them must have started falling last year, but it rests on its neighbor's crown. I looked at the heavily tilted trunk, the crown of which was intertwined with the crown of the one standing next to it. Their branches had intertwined, and the falling one had not perished. Both trees were green and bearing fruit. Only 23 were left. They still stood, supporting each other, bearing fruit and protecting the orchard. Please hold on a little longer, Siberians. I will write. Anastasia, you taught me to write books, but why didn't you teach me words that would make what I've written understandable to many people at once? A great many people. Why haven't I managed this? Why does my thinking get confused? Why did the cedars fall while people look on and do nothing? Not far from the former estates, which had preserved until now their beautiful orchards and shady alleys, there are villages. The sight of these villages spoils the entire surrounding landscape. If you look at them from afar, you get the impression that some kind of worm has come in and followed everything, digging up the flowering meadows. Thickets of grey village houses, outbuildings slapped together from all kinds of rotting materials, and muddy roads rutted by trucks and tractors contribute to this impression. I asked the local inhabitants, "Have you been to the orchards located among the cedars and oaks?" Many had been there and tried the apples, and the young people went there for picnics.
It's pretty there.
Say both the young and the old. When asked why someone hasn't set up his own orchard in its image and likeness, they give roughly the same answer.
We don't have the kind of money the gentleman who created that beauty had.
The old people talk about how the gentleman brought the cedar saplings all the way from Siberia. When asked, how much money would you need to take the cedar nuts from the cedars bearing them and plant them in the ground? Silence. The silence leads me to the following thought. It is not the lack of opportunity or means, but some coding within us that is to blame for the mess we're in. Right now, those who have money have built lots of homes. Next to these homes, the land has been dug up or paved with asphalt. In 20 or 30 years, this home will require repairs, and the children won't need this ramshackle place, this homestead, this homeland, and they will go their separate ways to find a new one. But they will take with them the same puzzling code, inherited from their parents, and repeat the life of time servers on the land rather than creators of something eternal. Who can remove this coating for despair, and how? Perhaps the future of Russia that Anastasia has talked about and revealed will somehow help with this. In order to dispel the doubts of skeptics, I've placed on the inside cover photographs of the amazing Russian orchards spreading their fruit-laden branches into a future Russia.
End of chapter. Join us for the next segment of Who Are We? Book 5 of the Ringing Cedar series, Anastasia's Russia.